Hey heroes, welcome to another amazing episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This show is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls, you can sign up for $1 per month over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below. The story of the Spider Slayers begins with an inventor named Spencer Smythe. Little is known of his early life, but as an adult, Spencer raised his son, Alistair Alfonso Smythe, in Glen Rock, New Jersey. A talented engineer and roboticist, the elder Smythe instilled in his ambitious son a passion for science. Seeking funding for his research, Spencer believed he'd found his opportunity when the Daily Bugle reported on the dangerous exploits of the masked vigilante Spider-Man. He built what appeared to be a squat semi-humanoid robot and presented it to the publisher J. Jonah Jameson. Despite his enmity for the wall crawler, Jameson initially dismissed Smythe out of hand, having already been embarrassed by his failed schemes involving the likes of the Scorpion and Mysterio. But neither man realized that Spider-Man was right there beside them in his civilian identity of photographer Peter Parker. Arrogantly believing the strange machine to be of no threat, Parker convinced Jameson to invest in Smythe's scheme, planning to easily defeat the robot and profit on pictures of the battle. However, he soon realized he'd underestimated the machine when it demonstrated numerous metal coils which could deploy from the front and successfully ensnare even someone with super strength. And so Jameson remotely piloted the robot, pursuing Spider-Man through the city with his face proudly displayed on the view screen. Furthermore, the machine was equipped with a device capable of detecting spiders and similar organisms when they were in range, allowing it to track its prey. Having underestimated his opponent, Spider-Man was caught, but while his strength wasn't enough to escape, his scientific acumen ultimately saved him. While caught in the metal coils, Peter was able to tear open a panel on the robot's chest and deactivate the machine. Jameson and Smythe arrived on the scene to investigate, but by the time they did, Spider-Man had slipped away, leaving his costume behind as a decoy. An annoyed Smythe retrieved his machine and returned to his home laboratory. He was briefly assisted with other projects by a man named Mark Raxton, but that ended poorly when Raxton's attempted theft of a liquid metal alloy they developed resulted in a lab accident that transformed him into the villainous Molten Man, but that's a story for another day. It was also around this time that Peter sneakily retrieved his Spider-Man costume, swapping it for a cheaper replica. While visiting Smythe's lab, he was ensnared again by the robot's coils when it detected his spideriness, but Peter had brought with him a jar of spiders as a cover, claiming they were for Smythe to use in his research. After that incident, Spencer Smythe began working on a new machine, one which he dubbed the Spider Slayer. Although it should be noted that because this was his second robot, it is now designated the Mark II, with the original robot retroactively considered the Mark I Spider Slayer. The new robot was even more humanoid in design and could mimic Spider-Man's wall-crawling abilities. It was larger, stronger, and even had a Destructo beam built into its forehead. Smythe presented this new design to Jameson, wanting to take revenge on their masked foe. JJ again piloted the device remotely in an attempt to capture and unmask Spider-Man. However, Smythe ultimately seized control because he wanted to kill the masked vigilante. It seems that the scientist was corrupted by his thirst for vengeance and began to go mad. This time, Spider-Man tricked Smythe by leading the Spider Slayer back to his lab. Surrounded by spiders that Smythe had kept for study and testing, the machine's overwhelmed tracking system started to malfunction. Smythe attempted to counteract this and finish Spider-Man by pushing the robot's power cells to their limit, but ended up overloading the whole system, destroying the second Spider Slayer. Smythe would only slide further into madness after that and began plotting criminal enterprises. Even after being appointed New York City's scientific advisor, he used his position to install a network of surveillance cameras across Manhattan. This system, meant to be used only by the police, caused quite a bit of controversy and was largely protested. Smythe, meanwhile, concocted a scheme to gain full control over the system, tricking Jameson into funding the creation of another robot. The Mark III Spider Slayer was itself more spider-like both in appearance and ability. Jameson briefly employed this Slayer in another attempt to capture Spider-Man. but Smythe secretly seized control and instead used it to steal the control unit for the citywide surveillance system. He presented the system to several of New York's top mob bosses in an attempt to gain wealth and power in the underworld. However, the criminals became dubious when it was suspected that Spider-Man knew that they were watching. And so Smythe unveiled the Mark IV Spider Slayer, for which the Mark III was simply a prototype. Unlike the previous robots, which were operated by remote, the Mark IV was essentially a vehicle that Smythe himself piloted. Ultimately, this machine was also defeated, and this time Spencer Smythe was arrested. His conspirators were captured as well, and the whole surveillance system was decommissioned. Smythe subsequently escaped from prison and tormented Spider-Man using robotic duplicates of the Vulture, the Sandman, and the Kingpin. He then attacked Spider-Man himself using a rebuilt Mark IV Spider Slayer. However, again, his insistence on attempting to defeat his foe personally turned out to be his downfall. The Mark V Spider Slayer was not built by Spencer Smythe, but by an electrobiologist named Dr. Marla Madison. With Smythe exposed as a criminal, Jonah Jameson challenged Madison to build a robot capable of defeating Spider-Man. Much like the Mark II, this Spider Slayer was a large humanoid shape, but was even more heavily armed with various weapons. Unlike previous iterations which used rudimentary control interfaces, the Mark V was remotely piloted with a psychokinetic helmet. This Spider Slayer interfered in a battle between Spider-Man and Will-O-the-Wisp at the Rockefeller Center's ice rink, but was defeated and pinned under the Prometheus statue when it fell over. While Dr. Madison did not continue to build Spider Slayers, this was only the beginning of her relationship with Jonah. As for Spencer Smythe, he got out of jail once again, but it seems his days were numbered. The radioactive materials he'd used to power his robots had left him terminally ill. Swearing revenge on both Jameson and Spider-Man, he abducted Jonah's lycanthropic son, John. Yeah, there's a bit of a long story there, but due to an artifact called the Godstone, John Jameson is prone to transforming into a creature called the Man-Wolf. Capturing John, Smythe induced another transformation and unleashed him on his enemies. John was able to regain control of himself, but Smythe had a backup plan. He remotely activated a device he'd implanted in the Man-Wolf, causing him to stumble backwards in pain and seemingly fall to his doom. Spider-Man attempted to save him, but John disappeared in a flash of light. In truth, the Man-Wolf was transported by the Godstone into another realm, but that's a story for another day. In either case, Jameson believed his son to be gone, and not knowing Smythe's involvement, blamed Spider-Man for his death. And so things worked out better than Smythe could have hoped when Jameson commissioned another Spider Slayer robot from him. Another arachnoid model, the Mark VI was destroyed in battle, but served its purpose by knocking out Spider-Man in the process. Capturing both his foes, Smythe shackled Spider-Man and Jameson to a deadly bomb that would go off in 24 hours. However, the mad scientist did not live to see his scheme play out and succumbed to his illness before the explosive detonated. Regardless, Spider-Man was able to remove the bomb without setting it off, throwing it high enough into the air that it could explode without hurting anyone. John Jameson later turned up alive and was reunited with his father. Meanwhile, Jonah continued to grow close with Marla Madison, and the two eventually married. However, the legacy of the Spider Slayers would continue through Spencer's son, Alistaire. Seeking revenge on Spider-Man, Alistair Smythe entered into the employ of the kingpin of crime, Wilson Fisk. Using Fisk's resources, Smythe built a Spider Slayer of his own. Dubbed the Mark VII, this version was another vehicle-type Spider Slayer, more akin to a flying saucer but with retractable appendages. Smythe soon found an opportunity to try and discover Spider-Man's secret identity when he saw the hero battling the Vulturians, a group of criminals who'd copied the Vulture's flying tech. During the battle, Spidey attempted to hang on to a pink hat which was meant to be a gift for his aunt. When the hat was dropped, Smythe was able to secretly take it and insert a tracking device into the headband. He followed the signal, but Spider-Man's Aunt May had briefly lent the hat to her friend Anna Watson. As a result, Smythe became convinced that Anna's niece, Mary Jane, was really Spider-Man, theorizing that her powers came from a kind of bionic suit. Of course, this was quickly debunked when both women were rescued by the real Spider-Man. The ensuing battle ended when Spider-Man tricked Smythe into crashing the Mark VII into a set of train yard power lines. While Spider-Man had only intended on disabling the machine, the resulting injuries left Smythe partially paralyzed. He subsequently built the Mark VIII Spider Slayer, a humanoid robot with extendable limbs he could pilot from within. He followed Spider-Man to Pittsburgh, and the two engaged in another battle. While this Spider Slayer gained the upper hand, Smythe was distracted when Mary Jane Watson interfered in the fight. He turned his attention towards her, causing Spider-Man to gain his second wind. Knocking the Spider Slayer over, Spider-Man ripped the front of the robot open and pulled Smythe out, handing the villain his second defeat. Smythe was committed to an insane asylum, but later escaped with several other inmates whom he brought to a secret headquarters. Holding them captive, he forced them to help him create more Spider Slayers, which he sent after Spider-Man. The Mark IXs were miniature spider robots placed around the city to search for their target. The Mark X was more monstrous than the previous versions, with razor-sharp claws and extra appendages. The Mark XI was like a flying beast with large wings and 3 lashing tails. The Mark XII was a bit more traditional in that it was a heavily armored humanoid design. The Mark XIII was an amoeboid Spider Slayer, but this one has a little bit of history beyond the Smythes. You see, one of the inmates that Smythe captured was a man named Max Young. He previously worked under another villainous scientist, Mendel Strom, the Robot Master. One of Strom's first creations was an amoeboid robot he employed against Spider-Man. And so the Spider Slayer Mark XIII was designed by Max Young based on the Robot Master's earlier work. When that failed, Young's next design, the Mark XIV Spider Slayer, was a large humanoid design reminiscent of the Marks II and V, but with 3 facial display screens instead of 1, signifying his dissociative identity disorder. That was also the Mark XIV's downfall when his conflicting alters caused the robot to turn on itself. And a disappointed Smythe then killed Max Young as a warning to the others. This invasion of the Spider Slayers continued with the Marks 15, modeled after a Black Widow spider, 16, which was a tarantula, and 17, a robotic scorpion. These 3 not only attacked in unison, but were capable of combining into the Mark 18 Spider Slayer. With some help from allies, Spider-Man defeated all of these and came face to face with Alistair Smythe once again. This time Smythe had outfitted himself with a bionic carapace and dubbed himself the Ultimate Spider Slayer. With webbing of his own, he came close to killing Spider-Man, but one of his captive assistants tried to convince him to show mercy. Smythe promptly killed the captive in cold blood, prompting Spider-Man to break free and defeat him. Smythe next resurfaced, working with the prospective crime lord Jason Tao. Using Tao's resources, he developed a new line of deadly robots, the Cyber Slayers. These robots were used in a cyber war against Tao's rival, Carolyn Traynor, the Lady Dr. Octopus. While Tao betrayed Smythe in an attempt to gain full control of the Cyber Slayers, he was ultimately shot and killed by the Lady Oc's assassin, the Pro. By the time Smythe resurfaced again, he'd abandoned his unsightly carapace, having restored his ability to walk without it. This time, as revenge for his role in his father's downfall, Smythe extorted Jonah Jameson into helping him, primarily by threatening John and Marla with his Mark IX mini-slayers. This time he rebuilt every Spider Slayer that he or his father had designed in an attempt to attack Spider-Man and his loved ones. This culminated in the debut of his newest creation, the Mark XIX, a large humanoid Spider Slayer with 6 arms. However, this robot also housed the control unit for the mini-slayers. And so when Spider-Man defeated the Mark XIX, the Mark IXs deactivated as well. And without his machines, Smythe himself was subdued by a baseball bat-wielding Jameson. After that, Alistair Smythe retreated, and for a time he abandoned his quest for vengeance. Around this time, a replica of the Mark I Spider Slayer was used by another criminal roboticist, the Reanimator, in a confrontation against the mutant adventurer Wolverine. Among the many robots that the Reanimator had accumulated, there was also one that appeared to be a Mark V Spider Slayer, the one designed and built by Marla Madison. However, it's unknown if this was the original or another replica. A newer Spider Slayer, dubbed the Mark XX, was later seen after Nick Fury's secret war in Latveria. That whole conflict centered around a conspiracy in which the Latvian Prime Minister, Lucia von Bardis, was secretly funding American supercriminals with tech-based powers. Since she was working with the criminal inventor known as the Tinkerer, it's not clear if the Mark XX was designed and built by Smythe, the Tinkerer, or someone else entirely. Smythe was certainly willing to provide his Spider Slayers to others, as he did for the Scorpion, another villain with a vendetta against Spider-Man and Jameson. He loaned the long-legged Mark XXI to the Scorpion, as well as an army of mini-slayers. But they were perhaps not as dangerous as previous models and were easily defeated by Spider-Man and She-Hulk. There was also an incident in which J. Jonah Jameson briefly reactivated the Mark I Spider Slayer and used it against She-Hulk out of frustration when the superheroine married his son John. Soon after that, Smythe secretly induced another of John's man-wolf transformations, likely as a way to torment his enemies without exposing his own involvement. After being elected to the mayor of New York, Jameson funded an anti-spider squad and outfitted them with military surplus Mandroid suits, essentially robotic armor previously used by agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He also incorporated technology from the first Spider Slayer into these suits, effectively transforming them into Mark XXII Spider Slayers. However, the name was soon reclaimed when Alistair Smythe returned with a new cybernetic armor and dubbed himself the Spider Slayer. By posing as another scientist, Professor Folsom, he infiltrated the Supermax prison known as the Raft and abducted Mac Gargan, the Scorpion. Using the work of Harlan Stillwell, the man who originally created the Scorpion, as well as his own knowledge of cybernetics, the Spider Slayer enhanced Gargan's capabilities and gave him a new Scorpion suit. Not only that, but he also used Stillwell's research to endow others with similar powers, creating an army of insectoid servants to aid in his revenge, the Slayer Swarm. But this time other heroes aided Spider-Man in his battle against the would-be Slayers. Ultimately, Smythe tried to strike at Jameson and take his vengeance against him personally, but Marla Madison pushed her husband out of the way, sacrificing herself to save Jonah's life. Spider-Man defeated Smythe soon after, but the damage was already done. Before she passed away, Marla asked Jonah not to blame anyone or waste any more of his life on hate, and ultimately he accepted that her death was his own fault. Despite this, he still used his political power to push for the death penalty for Smythe. The Spider Slayer was locked away in the Raft, but his imprisonment wasn't entirely without issue. During the Spider Island incident, when the population of New York was being transformed into giant spiders by a virus engineered by the Jackal, Jameson approached Smythe in prison seeking solutions for an entire city of spiders, only to succumb to the disease himself and try to attack. Smythe was injured, but before passing out from blood loss, he told Spider-Man that he already had all of the Slayers that he needed. This, it seems, was in reference to the Octobots, small robots developed by Dr. Octopus, which Spider-Man commandeered and briefly dubbed his own Spider Slayers, using them to spread the cure for the virus and save the city. Eventually, the day came for Alistair Smythe's execution, with both Jameson and Spider-Man in attendance. However, before he could be killed, he was saved by a legion of miniature robots which formed a new cybernetic suit. He also sent them to cybernetically enhance other inmates, Scorpion, Boomerang, and the Vulture. This whole situation, of course, culminated in another battle between Spider-Man and the Spider Slayer, but Smythe didn't realize that something was different about his opponent. This time, Spider-Man was out for blood and fatally stabbed Smythe in the heart with a piece of his own armor. In a last-ditch effort to save himself and claim the ultimate revenge, Smythe attempted to transfer his dying dying consciousness into Spider-Man's living body. However, Spider-Man had shielded himself against such a thing because it had already been done by Dr. Octopus. And so it wasn't really Spider-Man who killed Alistair Smythe, but Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man's body. Of course, that whole thing is another story entirely. Peter Parker eventually regained control, and furthermore, this was not truly the end for the Spider Slayer. Following all of that, a mad Spider-Man clone who'd taken the identity of the Jackal resurrected a multitude of dead villains with cloning technology, including both Alistair and Spencer Smythe. While many of these villains returned to death following the events of the clone conspiracy, it seems that the Smythes may still be out there, and thus the story of the Spider Slayers isn't over yet. But that is indeed all I have for you this week. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe for more marvelous content. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page, where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!